Those Days with the Monsters, Part 2. With a shaking breath, Kirrel turned to his holopad, still attempting to understand the information he had learned. He needed more time to grasp the situation, but he was already a few days late on his first report, and he didn't want to give the DIA a reason to send him back to cargo duty. Or did he? He really wasn't sure after what he'd learned.
Kirrel Nakta, liaison to the humans. Report 1. Since the department seems concerned about the infectious diseases of the humans, I think I'll start with that. The entire crew seemed very understanding about the risk their diseases pose to us. Of course, some species, like the Kirrelics, are probably in no danger of any human-carried diseases, but I think many carbon-based species would be at significant risk. The human have how do I say this professionally? An insane number of microorganisms in their bodies, most of which they do not consider infectious. Their medic, the one they call Doc, which I assume is some reference I do not understand, informed me that the average human has around 700 different species in their mouth.
Kirrel shivered before adding,
He also said that those are different from the ones in their stomach, and that the ones in their stomachs are different from the ones in the rest of their digestive tract. And all the ones in their combined digestive tract are different from the ones on their skin. And for some godforsaken reason, none of them are considered infectious.
Kirrel took a deep breath, settling his frills in an attempt to at least pretend that the mantle of liaison to a new species suited him.
They said there are only about 1,400 species that they consider infectious or disease-causing. Only 1,400. What's worse is that the human doc said that's less than about 1% of the microbe species that they know of. I don't even want to think about the sterilization procedures we would need to visit their planet.
After a moment to recover himself, Kirrel continued.
The reason that percentage is so low, Doc says, is because the human immune system is able to handle the rest. They have, how many did he say? 6 different kinds of immune cells? 7? It might have been more. They had some strange names, I can tell you that. Some of them I can't pronounce. Anyway, those cells do all different things. There are some that exist to put out antibodies, like a lot of immune systems do, and there are some that change the body's responses. Some put out hormones. Doc mentioned something he called a histamine, and everyone around us groaned. That one sounds important. They all looked over at someone that they called Sneezy, and he made a face the translator said was embarrassment, annoyance, and amusement. I wish I could describe the face. It was the most bizarre contortion of features I've ever seen, and I've seen a fray fold itself in half to fit through a jammed door.
Kirrel realized he was getting off topic, and his frill pulsed slightly purple as he recovered what he hoped looked like a professional pose.
Apparently they even have cells meant to recognize and kill their own cells, though Doc said he didn't want to get into why that would even be necessary. He said it would take far too long and he'd rather get there slowly.
Kirrel sighed slightly.
I suppose that's fair, but I admit I was disappointed, and not just because I wanted to collect more information for my bureaucratic overlords. I swear these humans are the craziest sons of...
He broke off and cleared his throat.
As I was saying, the humans seem a bit off the dock, you might say. Few of them kicked off and floated around in contagion containment, laughing and saying things like, "It's so bouncy in here," and "able to leap tall buildings in a single bound." Whatever that means, I didn't understand until I set foot onto their ship. The human ship, it was like standing under a pressure blast when I walked in. I've adjusted to it now, but I can see why the liaison had to be someone with an endoskeleton. You know the crazy part? The human Stevens said that it was not the full gravity of their home planet. He called it 0.8 G, whatever that means. They are already faster on their ship than they would be on their home planet, and they're quite fast.
Kirrel shook his head slowly, his second lids closing for a moment while he collected himself.
Not as fast as my own people, they're not quite built for that, but they make up for it in power and maneuverability. My people rely on speed to produce a strong impact. Humans can produce it from a standstill. That means they can produce the same impact in any direction. They didn't try to do it with a running start. I suppose they felt bad.
Kirrel sighed for what felt like the 100th time.
They don't seem like a violent sort, though I haven't seen them really fight. It seemed more like play wrestling what they were doing. I suppose they didn't like being cooped up in containment. I didn't either. Didn't get much chance to do play wrestling though. I was out pretty quick. Maybe I'll be stronger after this. The gravity might be a factor.
Kirrel paused, considering whether to include his diatribe on human food and what was considered tasty versus deadly poison, but he elected not to. Most of the base plants and meats were cleared for him, but once it was prepared it burned his mouth violently, and he ended up retching later. The humans had paused and made a note, placing it in the food preparation space they affectionately called the trough. Though Kirrel could not read it well, the human named Stevens had informed him that it read, "Do not give Kirrel chili verde. I don't care what he tells you, no." Which, while not exactly flattering, had triggered ripples of amusement in the rest of the crew, so Kirrel accepted it as a species joke that he didn't understand.
Aside from their microbial intensity, I don't think they pose too much of a threat. Still, best not to poke about in human space. God knows what unholy disease you might bring back. The Cuman doc has decided to take samples of my blood to see if I would survive visiting the Cuman homeworld. I told him there was no reason to do it, since I was taking an insane risk just by being on the Cuman ship in the first place, and I didn't feel like testing my luck. But he still seemed determined to do it, so I let him.
Kirrel made a slight face.
It took him a few tries to find a vein. They don't seem to have mastered subdermal blood collection yet, so he had a decent needle. I don't think my being covered in scales helped him much on that one. He seemed pretty pleased though when he finally got a look at my samples. But I have a decent immune system, and even if I have to take some precautions, my chance of survival is pretty good. I don't have as many immune cells as the Cumans have, not by light years, but Doc seemed to think I do pretty well, as long as none of them are carrying something he called MDRE. From his voice it sounded like MDRE is pretty bad even by Cuman standards.
After a moment of hesitation, Kirrel continued.
I met the Cuman engineer today. The crew call him Grumpy, and I can see why. He told, and I quote,
"all the pasty nerds to get the hell out before we routed the warp discharge through their shoelaces."
They laughed and left me alone with him for a bit. I thought I might be included in the pasty nerd group, whatever the hell that means, but he seemed to be willing to let me stay for a bit, and even tolerated a few questions. I think he was disappointed that I wasn't an engineer, but when I explained the situation behind a cargo jockey becoming liaison, he said he approved of the efficiency and left it at that.
After a moment during which Kirrel's neck frills turned a contemplative silver, he continued.
I don't think Cumans overall are that efficient. They certainly aren't as driven by it as the Frey are. They definitely appreciate it when it reduces the time they have to stay where they are and increases the speed that they can go to, wherever the hell they're going, but it's not a motivator exactly. Except maybe for Grumpy. He seems to like efficiency more than the rest of the crew.
Kirrel took a moment, silver running the length of his frill spines, then decided his report was long enough.
This is all I've learned so far about the Cumans. Oh, no. I learned one more thing. Apparently there's a great Cuman tragedy they still talk about, where Cumans from one place arrived somewhere else and carried a disease with them. According to Doc, it basically destroyed a whole subsection of the species. Maybe that's why they were so understanding when I showed them the picture of the microbes, even when we couldn't communicate. By the way, you folks should definitely put more attention into whatever department decodes lexicons. You sent a cargo jockey in for first contact without even a working lexicon to go off. I don't know who your higher-ups are, but I can't imagine I would have reflected well on you if the humans were even a bit more aggressive.
After Kirrel submitted his report, he stood, feeling the gravity shoving down on him. He was quite hungry after the Chili Verde incident, and he hoped that there would be some meat he could give a simple heat treatment to. "Hey there, spaceman," he heard, as soon as he approached the dining area. Kirrel's frills lifted slightly and turned an inquisitive pink.
"Hello, I don't think I know your name yet. You're..."
Name's Jeffrey Charmer. You can call me Sleepy if you like." The Cuman downed a glass of some kind of fluid and bared his teeth. Affability. Kirrel blinked. Was his translator broken? Since when were bared teeth a sign of affability? But, then again, the Cumans had shown that expression a lot when they were allowed back on their ship.
And what do you do, Cuman Sleepy?"
The strange sound that Kirrel was learning meant amusement sounded for a moment before Sleepy stood up, setting his glass on the table. "I'm the night shift. The captain takes care of piloting during the day. I deal with any emergencies during the night. Jack of all trades, if you will." Kirrel wasn't quite sure what jack of all trades meant, but he had learned a new thing about the Cumans. They slept, and apparently pretty deeply if there wasn't a guarantee that the captain would wake to take control of emergencies.
"Why do you have strange nicknames, Cuman Sleepy?"
That. Don't worry about it. It's an old human thing." Sleepy made his way up to the bridge with a smile, running his odd, blunt, pink appendages over the tiny buttons. How anyone managed to hit those was beyond Kirrel's understanding, but he supposed with their tiny digits, the Cumans might manage it. "Get some rest. We're doing something just a bit crazy in the morning, so I'm told." Kirrel found it difficult to sleep that night, trying to understand what a Cuman merchant ship might consider crazy.